Love is the cruelest of all illusions. Charles Bukowski. Before we begin, here's a small ritual. Write in the comments one word that accurately describes your current state. Sign it, and let's get started. Light emerges from the depths of the human soul when the last fragments of naive hope have fallen away. In a world filled with ceaseless longing, the individual often stands on an unseen threshold, believing that a gesture of tenderness or a gentle embrace will bring the rescue they have sought for so long. At first it feels like salvation, as if that tender warmth in another soul can erase the quiet despair that has accompanied every sunrise. Yet the more we lean on that fragile promise of deliverance, the heavier it becomes. For not every offer of comfort is genuine. Sometimes what appears to be caring hands can slowly break the spirit they are meant to protect. This is the paradox of the thing so many call love, a paradox that reveals itself only when illusions crumble and reveal the deeper truth beneath. Many are taught that so-called love is the remedy for all emptiness. They chase it like a traveler in a barren land chasing a mirage of water. In that chase, they surrender parts of themselves, believing that anything is worth giving if it means receiving affection in return. They adapt to expectations that do not reflect their inner nature, so certain that they must earn the acceptance of another at all costs. But behind the pleasant words and promises, there can be an unseen desire to control or a hidden hunger for validation. The tragedy grows when both parties lose the thread of who they truly are, submerging themselves in roles they believe they must play. The one who appears to save becomes a silent oppressor, and the one who craves saving becomes a voluntary captive. It is a slow unraveling. A person can spend countless days picturing a tender presence that will soothe every wound, only to discover that each promise they relied on was a fragile shell, hollow on the inside. The heartbreak is often not loud. It slips in like a quiet, unwelcome visitor, stealing hope by small increments, until the soul begins to realize that everything it believed about love may have been a carefully woven fantasy. There are moments when the brightness of that fantasy is so convincing that it becomes impossible to see how it masks a darker truth. And so the cycle continues, fueled by an insatiable need to feel chosen, to feel worthy, to believe that someone else can fill a silent void that one does not dare confront alone. When people speak of love, they often imagine a benevolent force that soothes and heals. But there is another edge to this force, one that constricts and wounds under the guise of tenderness. Sometimes a gentle whisper can become a chain, and a warm embrace can turn into a prison that restricts the freedom of spirit. Such a dynamic frequently arises from fear, especially fear of loss. The giver of this controlled affection dreads being left behind, so they hold the other so tightly that there is no longer any air to breathe. This kind of involvement is not always a conscious malevolence. It can arise from genuine terror of being abandoned. The arms that wrap around a loved one can be laced with insecurity, though outwardly they may appear comforting. Over time, the one on the receiving end of this care realizes they are no longer permitted to make choices freely or voice opinions that differ from the caregiver's blueprint for how life should be lived. The soul that depends on another for constant reassurance surrenders its own power bit by bit. The illusions of safety can be mesmerizing. Why stand alone if someone else can shoulder your burdens? Yet, that very reliance feeds the fear that you cannot exist without external attention and approval, so the cycle of dependence deepens, harming both sides. The caretaker grows weary of sustaining an impossible role, while the one who relies on that caretaker becomes ever more convinced that they cannot survive unassisted. Even if outwardly it appears calm, the undercurrents twist into resentment and frustration, as neither truly thrives. There are also connections that do not manifest as a dramatic breakdown. Instead, they chip away at vitality over a long period. Days slip by with minimal spoken conflict, but an undercurrent of fatigue hovers, like a thin cloud that never breaks. In these spaces, individuals continue daily tasks, while an invisible weight inside them grows heavier. They might recall a time when their hearts felt alive with the spark of curiosity and joy. Now, that spark flickers weakly beneath routines that offer little renewal of the spirit. This malaise persists, and neither person identifies the root cause. They call their arrangement a kind of steady bond. They declare they have simply settled into a calm pattern, ignoring that real closeness does not drain vitality, but nurtures it. Both endure the stagnation, labeling it normal, determined to keep the structure afloat, rather than acknowledge that it is draining them of joy each day. The reliance on illusions is a central thread in these stories. We often crave being recognized for qualities we have yet to accept in ourselves. Someone praises us for our kindness or for our optimism, and we try to present these attributes nonstop, hiding the feelings that might contradict that established persona. It becomes a trade, an agreement, because we fear that without these qualities on display, the other may withdraw their affection. Slowly, those hidden parts of us gather in the shadows of the psyche. We suppress anger and doubt. We bury insecurities deep beneath a show of constant good cheer, hoping to keep the illusions of acceptance alive. Over time, the secret resentments and unvoiced frustrations fester. Eventually, they push through, leaving both sides confused and hurt. The image that was loved was never the entirety of the individual. It was a selective reflection, responding to external desires rather than authentic expression from within. It grows more disheartening when we see how easily we place unrealistic ideals upon others. We meet someone who exhibits a gentle sense of humor, or who has a certain brightness in their voice. We decide that they must also embody strength, wisdom, endless generosity, and many other imagined traits. The slightest indication that they might deviate from this perfect image throws us into turmoil. We may feel deceived, not recognizing that we were the creators of that false idol. Similarly, we might be placed on a pedestal by someone who expects us to remain flawless. Our inevitable human imperfections become a betrayal of that expectation. In this toxic dance, no one is truly seen, because each is too invested in illusions to discover the nuanced reality of the other. At some point, these stories approach a threshold where illusions can no longer sustain themselves. Masks shatter, projections dissolve. The heart stands in raw truth, confronted by how many years have been devoted to illusions that never match the real essence of the people involved. At first, there is shock and a profound sense of loss, because the fantasy was comforting, even if it was harmful underneath. Then, after the shock dissipates, an emptiness emerges. It is a space with no more illusions left to cling to. In that emptiness, the individual confronts the undeniable reality that no external source can fill their internal void. Nothing changes the need to face oneself. Without roles to hide behind, the fragile sense of self wavers, forcing a deeper exploration. It feels like an endless plain with no markers to guide the way. This can be terrifying, but it can also be the starting point of true strength, since there are no more illusions to rely upon. When a soul stands in that emptiness and chooses not to flee, it gains an unexpected sense of freedom. There is no more chasing a savior to patch up old wounds. There is an opportunity to learn how to ease that pain from within, rather than demanding that someone else accept full responsibility for the healing. This experience can feel raw, like stepping barefoot onto cold ground, yet it also awakens a sense of aliveness. The illusions that once covered reality begin to dissolve. In the absence of forced roles, the true voice of the individual becomes audible. There is no requirement to pretend any longer. Instead, there is an opening to cultivate genuine self-awareness, which can lay the foundation for deeper connections in the future. A love that emerges after these revelations does not wear the same shining armor that illusions once displayed. It lacks the artificial glow of a grand rescue or a perfect union. Instead, it carries the resonance of honesty. It neither demands that you transform into an ideal, nor attempts to fix every shortcoming. It becomes a space where two individuals who have faced their own shadows can meet without fear of being unmasked. This kind of closeness leaves room for contradiction and error. There is no punishment for showing frustration or weariness, because the bond does not depend on a romanticized myth of eternal happiness. Its focus lies in understanding and acceptance, not in endless reassurance of perfection. Such a love avoids the cage of ownership. It does not whisper that you must comply with its rules to remain worthy. It recognizes that each person retains the right to grow, to re-examine beliefs, to move in new directions, and possibly to choose to walk away if continuing together becomes stagnant or restrictive. This love does not vanish when it sees a flaw. It also does not devour your autonomy by insisting it is the only guiding light. Instead, it sits quietly beside you, supporting your growth while tending to its own. It does not dissolve into blame or bitterness when conflict arises, but meets those moments of friction with openness and the courage to remain authentic. The path to a love that does not deceive often requires traveling through a lonely corridor, where every false comfort has been stripped away. This corridor can be long, haunted by memories of times when we gave too much of ourselves, or when we demanded too much from another soul. We remember moments of betrayal, or times when illusions cracked, but we refused to see the cracks. We recall how we clung to patterns that drained our energy, or let ourselves be defined by how devoted we were to chasing someone else's approval. In that corridor, we either embrace our painful lessons or retreat into new illusions. Yet illusions always risk crumbling again. The soul, after repeated experiences, usually tires of illusions and seeks something real. This journey is rarely swift. It can involve an uncomfortable confrontation with old emotional injuries. Rage, grief, and shame might surface, long held in the darkness. We can discover parts of ourselves that we once considered unacceptable, such as hidden anger or envy. Accepting these aspects brings relief, since denying them only gave them strength behind the scenes. Embracing the darker edges of the psyche does not mean we glorify negativity. It means we become complete, no longer suppressing large segments of our humanity for the sake of seeming pure or lovable. Wholeness arises when both light and shadow find their place, no longer at war with each other. If another soul approaches us in this state of wholeness, we no longer scramble to be lovable or to secure their devotion with endless accommodation. We do not contort ourselves in the hope of remaining indispensable to them, nor do we imagine them as a perfect figure. We see them as a being with unique complexities, neither an angel nor a demon. We remain open, but not dependent. Our sense of self is rooted in an internal foundation that does not rely on someone else's constant reassurance. We recognize that if they choose to stay, they do so freely, and if they depart, it does not annihilate our worth. Love is invited to grow in a space free from desperation. The energy once invested in illusions is now channeled into exploring genuine closeness. This closeness respects each person as an evolving entity. None are pressured to remain static or to fulfill an ideal, because both acknowledge that growth is continuous. The bond can stretch or shift without collapsing, because it is not held up by illusions of perfection. Both individuals step away from the notion that a romantic union must be a perpetual rescue mission or an endless quest for the next wave of adoration. Instead, they share experiences, secrets, and vulnerabilities without the underlying dread of being unworthy. They see that true intimacy often emerges in quiet moments, not in grand gestures or staged displays of devotion. The emptiness that once felt agonizing transforms into a wellspring of potential. Freed from illusions, the spirit can explore with a fresh perspective. No illusions means no illusions to preserve, so there is less tension about being found out as flawed. The beauty of this honesty can be startling. Everything moves more gently, because no one is trying to uphold a glamorous fantasy that must remain unchallenged. Mistakes become an opportunity to learn rather than the cause of rejection. Differences become a chance for exchange rather than a reason to withdraw. Even times of conflict, which once were dreaded, can bring deeper closeness, for they test the foundation that is built on clarity instead of pretense. In this presence of authentic connection, one can finally see that the concept of love as a grand rescue was always flawed. No external entity can banish the silent battles we each must face. Even in the best partnership, the personal journey of self-acceptance cannot be outsourced. The illusions that once promised escape from pain lose their power to entice us, because we see that the only lasting way to address sorrow is to acknowledge it fully and learn from it. The illusions may still call, offering quick fixes or romantic highs, but after the veil has been lifted, their emptiness is too apparent to ignore. People who have walked through the cycles of illusions and arrived at honesty often experience a sense of calm that they once deemed impossible. They realize there is no absolute guarantee in matters of affection. Every connection carries risk. Yet, this risk is not a looming dread. It is a natural aspect of allowing oneself to be open and alive. The freedom of not being shackled by illusions far outweighs the fleeting comfort illusions once seemed to provide. Realizing that love does not have to be a perfect solution frees the heart from the exhausting search for a savior. If two individuals meet and choose to walk forward with honesty, they build a new kind of bond. It is a companionship that does not limit individuality. Neither tries to fit the other into a mold. There is a shared respect for each person's unique path. One can say that this is the essence of a love that does not betray. It persists not through illusions of grandeur, but through a mutual understanding that both parties stand as complete beings who still retain the capacity to grow. There is no guilt-laden demand that one must fix the other's life, because each has learned to stand on their own. In a world that constantly advertises bright tales of happily ever after, this perspective can feel strange or even subversive. We have been taught that only a grand union can bring ultimate fulfillment, yet the narrative shifts when the illusions begin to dissolve. One discovers a quiet form of liberation and sees that the purpose of human bonds is not to serve as a permanent remedy for existential fears. Rather, a bond can be a shelter where souls exchange warmth and insight. It can serve as a safe place to express pain without condemnation, a place to share triumphs without envy, a place to encounter the rawness of vulnerability without losing integrity. This shift is not effortless because illusions cling tightly to the heart that once found solace in them. But with every step away from illusions, the promise of self-trust blossoms, and self-trust, once firmly established, becomes the basis for any resilient relationship. A person who trusts their own capacity to exist fully no longer panics if a relationship changes form or fades. They understand that nothing outside can forever guard them from the transformations inherent in life. They realize that the gifts of time and experience can be embraced, allowing them to shape a more genuine way of connecting with others. When illusions finally crumble, one might experience waves of remorse for what was sacrificed or overshadowed. Yet that sorrow, if faced openly, can lead to acceptance, and then a profound surge of energy to move forward free from the burdens of false expectations. Many find that once they stop entertaining illusions, they have more space within to welcome the unpredictable flow of real encounters. Paradoxically, letting go of illusions can deepen the capacity to love without fear. The terror of being unmasked fades away, replaced by a steady sense of identity that does not require constant external feeding. By no longer defining love as a triumphant cure, we see it instead as a shared journey. Two travelers meet, each carrying their history of shadows and revelations. They exchange stories, neither erasing their own path nor forcing the other to rewrite. They offer empathy rather than a vow to shoulder all burdens. They celebrate each other's strengths without expecting those strengths to mask flaws. They create an environment where both are free to breathe, to falter, and to stand tall again. And this authenticity, rooted in patience and honesty, defies the illusions that once dictated every step. In that environment, loyalty does not become a suffocating grip. Loyalty is a mutual respect that thrives when both choose to remain, not because they are coerced by fear, but because they honor the growth that blossoms in shared experiences. It is the kind of loyalty that understands how each soul navigates personal storms while acknowledging the reassuring presence of a companion who listens, not a savior who must fix everything. Through such loyalty, there is room for confrontation without cruelty, for disagreement without abandonment. The illusions that once insisted on rigid roles are cast aside, replaced by a more resilient harmony that allows for discord, yet remains intact. The ultimate realization that surfaces from this exploration is that love does not exist to save anyone. It stands as a presence that endures without betrayal. When a person has already begun to save themselves from the illusions that once paralyzed them, love becomes an invitation to walk side by side without illusions, offering truth instead of spectacle, companionship instead of captivity, and growth instead of stagnation. It carries a power that neither smothers nor yields to exhaustion, a power not reliant on fantasy, but on the beauty of honest recognition. This is how real closeness anchors itself in our lives, defying every deceitful promise of an unreal paradise, and guiding us back to the quiet wholeness we have been seeking all along. Awakening to this reality can be unsettling, for it calls into question the stories we have constructed around what it means to feel cherished and valued. We may recall how our earliest teachings, whether from family or cultural narratives, glorified a type of attachment that promised lasting bliss through external validation. These teachings rarely admitted that this type of attachment can lead to a subtle disintegration of the self. Yet the moment we notice how often our needs or fears fueled those connections, we begin to break the hold of that inherited story. Bit by bit, we unearth the realization that affection cannot flourish on a foundation built by denial of our own pain. We stop chasing illusions of a partner who will mend our every wound. We turn inward, perhaps for the first time, and truly see the roots of our longing. The unspoken desperation for someone else to remedy our loneliness dissolves, because we sense that such a remedy can never replace the inner voice urging us to become whole in our own right. A vital step on this path is to develop an honest relationship with solitude. This does not imply that an individual must seal themselves away from all companionship. Rather, it means learning to stand in solitude without shame or anxiety, recognizing that our worth is not determined by how many people surround us or how consistently we receive their validation. In the hush of solitude, the surface noise fades, and we can observe what truly stirs within. We might uncover anger we never addressed, aspirations we never nurtured, or regrets we have tried to bury. Solitude reveals a reflection that is untainted by the immediate influence of others. If we allow that reflection to show itself, we move closer to an honest foundation from which genuine connections can emerge. From that foundation, a transformative shift in how we experience closeness occurs. We are no longer willing to give parts of ourselves away for fleeting moments of approval. We sense a different kind of mutual presence with others, one that is fueled by respect for each individual's wholeness. This is not the wide-eyed devotion that illusions require, but a calm abiding, where each soul sees the other as a companion in the mystery of existence, not as a tool to fill an ache. In moments of conflict, we learn to state our truths openly, instead of withholding them out of fear of losing the illusion of harmony. We begin to trust that surviving disagreements or misunderstandings will not demolish the bond if it is built upon truth rather than fantasy. The vulnerability of stating what we truly think becomes an act of liberation rather than a pathway to rejection. With illusions removed, we are free to recognize the creative potential within every interaction. We see that a meaningful bond is not merely about meeting expectations, but about co-creating experiences that encourage growth. Perhaps there are disagreements in worldview, or diverging preferences in lifestyle. Instead of interpreting these differences as threats, we come to see them as sparks for learning. The friction no longer signifies a failure of love. Instead, it becomes a natural occurrence when two distinct individuals intersect. This is how relationships evolve, from a codependent tangle to a dance of two who can celebrate both shared ground and contrasting views. At this stage, one might recall earlier phases of life spent in frantic searching. The memory of a younger self who believed that love must rescue them from existential dread can bring about waves of compassion. We realize that this younger self simply did not know how to hold their own pain. They had been taught to hand that pain to someone else in exchange for acceptance. By reflecting on these memories, we trace the evolution of our perspective from naive longing to a more rooted insight. Each step was necessary to reach a deeper grasp of genuine affection. This insight does not come from blame toward those who might have exploited or misunderstood us. Rather, it arises from acknowledging that illusions were mutual creations. Both parties, in their own ways, participated in a facade because it felt safer than confronting the starkness of truth. In the clarity of this understanding, a person can speak calmly about their boundaries without fear of being accused of selfishness. Boundaries become a natural expression of self-respect and not a rejection of another. We begin to see that love does not demand utter blending into a single entity, but fosters an environment where each person maintains their individuality and fosters interdependence that respects personal growth. The emphasis shifts from romantic ideals of never-ending surrender to a recognition that true closeness honors each participant's identity. This closeness is alive and dynamic. It has the capacity to adapt as each person explores new layers of their own existence. Consider how liberating it is to meet someone and not feel that you must conceal your anger or sorrow in order to remain worthy of their regard. Imagine the relief of no longer fearing that they might vanish the moment you reveal your uncertainties. Conversely, imagine the ease of knowing that you are not expected to be anyone's savior, that your role is not to carry their every emotional burden. Instead, you both stand in a shared realm of honesty, where emotions can be expressed without shame or demands for immediate correction. In that realm, you see that a person's tears do not render them weak, and that a surge of frustration does not make them unlovable. The illusions of perpetual bliss are replaced by the vivid reality of authentic communion. This shift penetrates into the very essence of how you see yourself. Once illusions are removed, you are confronted with the fullness of your being. This includes your potential to inflict hurt as well as to heal, your capacity to doubt as well as to believe. Embracing these facets does not undermine your dignity. It anchors it in truth. The illusions once told you to hide so-called negative traits. Now, you acknowledge them as part of the grand tapestry of human complexity. You become more forgiving toward yourself, and as a result, you extend that forgiving attitude to those around you. The sense of condemnation and idealization fades, replaced by a profound acceptance that growth is an ongoing process, not a final destination. An environment emerges where love is a patient guide, not a harsh critic or a demanding savior. Love breathes through quiet understanding rather than loud proclamations. It does not require a script or a guarantee of unwavering devotion, for it evolves alongside the individuals involved. There are mornings filled with serene warmth and evenings weighted by inner struggles. Through it all, the bond endures, not because illusions keep it afloat, but because honest communication and empathy allow each person to move through their own storms without losing sight of the shared space they hold together. That space remains open to transformation, to renewal, to a consistent reevaluation of what it means to accompany each other on the path of life. Even the word itself, love, begins to shed the romantic baggage it once carried. It no longer means salvation. It no longer means being rescued from fear or isolation. Instead, it signifies a readiness to stand beside someone, to learn their language while continuing to speak your own, to offer support without imprisoning them behind expectations. It might appear less grandiose than the illusions once painted, yet it possesses a quiet grandeur that illusions could never sustain. This is because illusions rely on the denial of uncomfortable truths, while genuine affection rests upon the premise that each person recognizes they are incomplete and evolving, yet worthy of compassion. Love becomes a shield, not against pain, but against the unrelenting tyranny of falsehood. As this perspective settles in, the fear of abandonment diminishes. We see that while nothing is forever, the time we do share can be rich and meaningful. The illusions that once drove us to cling desperately to a companion lose their power, replaced by a willingness to let each connection shape us without defining us entirely. We discover that we are capable of grieving a loss while still preserving our sense of self-worth. This realization lifts the suffocating weight from bonds that previously revolved around fear. They can now breathe with the natural ebb and flow of life, because both individuals know that parting does not equate to shattering. In a world that worships spectacle, many may doubt that such a subtle expression of love has real weight. Yet the resilience it cultivates far surpasses the short-lived excitement provided by illusions. The real test of any bond emerges in moments of hardship, disappointment, or change. The illusions that burn brightly in the beginning often fade under these pressures, revealing a hollow core. The love that endures is the one that embraces reality unflinching. It does not promise constant bliss, but it offers a solace grounded in understanding that rough days do not undermine the commitment to remain true to oneself and to each other. Reflecting on this arc, one sees how illusions, though painful, can be valuable teachers. They highlight our deepest fears and intensify our longing for acceptance. Through the repeated collapse of illusions, we gain the courage to face what was always ours to face. We develop the fortitude to honor the parts of ourselves we once hid, and we begin to see that our worth is not anchored in how many illusions we can keep alive, but in how sincerely we can live without them. Out of this sincerity emerges a perspective on love that is no longer clouded by false beliefs. It is a perspective that recognizes our shared humanity, our shared frailty, and our potential to uplift one another when freed from manipulation and masquerade. We're sure you've discovered plenty of value, so subscribe now and stay connected.